It was one of those still spring evenings, the kind where the sky wears shades of lavender and rose, and the breeze carries the scent of fresh-cut grass. I had just returned from the grocery store, nothing special, just one of those quiet, solitary trips I've always enjoyed. No rush, no conversation, just the soft hum of the radio and the comforting rhythm of picking vegetables at my own pace. Eric, my son, had stayed home. At 23, he was back from college, taking a break to figure out his next steps. I wasn't pushing him. I remembered how adrift I felt in my early 20s and wanted to give him room to breathe, to think, to just exist without the weight of expectations. Having him back under the same roof again brought a strange kind of peace. The house hadn't felt that full in years. When I walked in, the familiar scent of lemon cleaner and worn wood greeted me. Eric was stretched out on the couch, an old detective film flickering on the TV, the kind I used to watch with his father long ago. He looked up and smiled, not a distracted, automatic smile, but one of those genuine ones that start in the eyes and land softly in your chest. "Hey, Mom," he said, sitting up a little. "Need help with the bags?" I told him I didn't have many and made my way to the kitchen. He followed and leaned in the doorway like he used to when he was younger, just watching while I moved around. We talked about the job search, how it felt being back home, my early garden sprouts. He seemed more present than usual, really listening. I felt his gaze follow me as I worked, and I noticed how I slowed down, becoming strangely aware of the space between us. Dinner was simple: roasted chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes. We ate at the little round table by the window, the same one where he once spilled apple juice as a toddler. The sunset had turned gold by then, casting a quiet glow through the curtains. It all felt softer somehow. Closer, he told me about a girl from college. Someone who'd hurt him, though he didn't say it outright. I heard it in his careful phrasing, the way he hesitated between thoughts. I listened, nodding, laughing gently when he made jokes to cover the sting. After dinner, we lingered. I poured us each a small glass of wine. He didn't usually drink with me, but something about the night made it feel right. Maybe it was the stillness of the house. Maybe we both needed a little more than food to fill the silence. Eventually, we drifted back to the living room, him on the couch, me curled into the armchair. We talked about old family trips, movies, the time he broke his arm on the neighbor's swing. He looked at me then not like a boy looking at his mother, but like a man seeing someone he truly cared for. It caught me off guard, not in a bad way, just unfamiliar. He asked about my life the years after his dad passed, how I'd managed. No one ever really asked that, but he did, and he meant it. His eyes never strayed, his voice steady and low. "You're stronger than you think, Mom," he said, his voice catching slightly. "I don't know how you did it." Without thinking, I reached out and took his hand. It felt instinctual, like I'd done it 1,000 times before, but this time it was different. His thumb brushed the back of my hand gently, and something in me stirred. Not desire, not confusion. Just a deep emotional warmth, something unnameable and raw. We sat like that in silence, the old clock ticking. The hum of the fridge barely audible. "I wish I could give something back," he said quietly. "For everything you gave up for me, you already have." I told him. I meant it. Even if I didn't quite know what I meant, his gaze held mine for a long moment. Something unspoken passed between us, a shift so subtle and strange I couldn't describe it. I stood to take our glasses to the sink. He followed, leaning once more in the kitchen doorway. I felt his presence behind me, familiar and somehow new. When I turned around, he was right there, his face just inches from mine. He didn't say anything, just tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and smiled a little sadly. "Thanks for tonight," he said. "It meant more than you know." He kissed my cheek gently, then turned and headed upstairs. I stayed there for a long time, hands resting on the counter, listening to the old stairs creak as they settled. My skin still held the ghost of his touch. Something had shifted between us. I didn't know what it meant or if it meant anything at all. But I knew it would stay with me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around me. Everything sounded the same, wind tapping the windows, wood creaking softly, but it all felt changed. Like some invisible thread between us had been pulled taut in a way I hadn't noticed before. I kept thinking about the kitchen, how he looked at me, how his hand brushed my cheek, tender, careful, like I was something important. I wasn't sure what I was to him anymore. And I wasn't sure he knew either. By morning, I told myself it was nothing, just a moment. Too much wine, the quiet between a mother and son, rediscovering each other. But when I came down the stairs and found him already in the kitchen, hair tousled, making coffee in that worn-out hoodie I'd washed 100 times, he looked at me like he'd been waiting. "Morning," he said, voice still thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound breezy. I reached past him for a mug, and his hand brushed the small of my back, steadying me, even though I didn't need it. It lingered for a second too long. When I looked up, his eyes were already on mine. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Fine, just didn't sleep much." But even as I said it, I knew something was different. I knew it wasn't just me. He poured me a cup without another word and handed it. 2 more fingers brushed again. And neither of us pulled away immediately. There was an unspoken awareness in the air, like we both knew something was there, but we were too afraid to name it. We spent the day doing nothing in particular. He offered to help clean out the attic, some things dead. Been putting off for years, it was full of boxes from his childhood, from a life that had passed it for too quickly. We laughed a lot. Up there found his baby blanket, his old soccer cleat photo albums from our trip to Maine, but every so often, I'd catch him looking at me with that same quiet intensity, and every time my chest would tighten. At one point, we sat on the dusty floor, knees touching, flipping through a photo album of him as a boy. There was a picture of me holding him on my lap when was no more than for his face covered in chocolate, mine lit up with a law. "I barely remembered you were beautiful," he said suddenly. I looked up from the photo and saw he wasn't smiling. "Meant it, you still are," he added softer now. I tried to brush it off with a chuckle. "You're biased." "No," he said. "He just never really looked before. Not like it." This my heart skipped. I could feel Theo shift again, thick with something gun spondles. Have said something I should have a change of the subject, laughed it off, but I didn't. Instead, I just looked back down. Note the photo, my fingers tracing the edge. The image, the silence stretched beaut. Wasn't awkward, it was heavy into metallic. Later that evening, after we'd showered off the attic dust and eaten leftovers for dinner, I found myself sitting on the back porch watching the ski darken. He joined me, sitting closets. Air cool but not cold. We shared a blanket over our legs, like we used to Dowhun. He was a child, his shoulder to Shedman, and neither of us moved away. "Can I ask you something?" he said, after a long silence. "Of course. What's it like to be alone for so long?" The question caught me off guard. I didn't answer right away. I watched a plane blink across the sky, imagining the people inside going somewhere. "Knew it's quiet," I said. "Finale sometimes peaceful. Sometimes it hurts," Hannah did. Slowly, I never thought about it, Mac, until now. There was something deeper in his voice, something vulnerably. Wasn't just asking about me. He was asking about his own fears, about what waited for him down the line, about love and loss, and all the things we pretend won't touch us until they do. I think I say gently, we all want to be seen. Really seen and held, even when we're not asking for it. He turned his face to me as soft and searching. "I see you." Words hung there between us, suspended in the cool night air. My breath caught, and for a moment, I felt like I was looking at him through entirely new eyes, not as a boy I raised, but as a man who had grown into something steady and consuming. I could talk to trust, share silence. With my hand rested on the blanket between us, he placed his over mine, warm, steady, no pressure, just presence. "I'm glad I came back." "Whispered me too," I whispered back, Helen in his forehead resting gently against mine. It was not a kiss, not yet, but it felt like a moment that could have been, that might be, if either of us took the next breath differently. Then the porch light flickered, old wiring, nothing new, but it was enough to make us both pull back. Slightly blinking, Ishud head up, he said, his voice low as still on me. Okay. We stood. Slowly, I watched him walk to the door, his hand pousing on the knob. Then he turned back and looked at me again. Good night, Mom. Good night, sweetheart. He disappeared inside, and I stood there for a long while, the stars swirling above me, the Santa blooming lilacs in the air, something unspoken had passed between us again. And it wasn't going away. The next few days unfolded in a quiet rhythm, Ericond. I fell into a routine that felt itly natural: morning coffee shared in the kitchen, long walks through the neighborhood, in the afternoon small house chores we tackled together. Just toffle the time, but beneath it all, there was a current. Neither of us addressed a softness in his voice. When he spoke tone, a stillness in the way. I watched him move around the house. I found myself waiting for his footsteps in the morningless stoning, for the way he cleared his throat before coming down the stairs, the sound of him pouring cereal or flipping on the coffee machine. It wasn't obsession, it was something gentler, and awareness, like noticing the season change. You don't always know the moment it happens, but you feel it in your bones. In Wednesday afternoon, it started to rain, a soft drizzle at first, then heavier, until the sky grew dark and the windows were streaked with water. I had lit a candle in the living room that kindled with the warm vanilla scent I always liked when the weather turned. Eric wandered in with a book, one I had lent him years ago, and asked if I wanted to zot and read with him. It felt sweet, almost childlike. You curled up on opposite ends of the couch, our legs stretched toward each other under a shared blanket. I didn't read. I watched the rain. I watched him pretend to read, though. I knew his eyes hadn't moved across the page, and sometime eventually he closed the book and rested it on the coffee table. His eyes met mine, and I felt the moment stretch again. That invisible line pulling tighter. Do you remember when Dad Yuseto read to us during storms? Huh? He asked. I do. He had that deep voice, always made the story sound more real. Eric smiled. He loved you so much, I could always see it. I nodded, feeling a smellack in my chest. I loved him too. Still, though, in a way. Eric shifted slightly, moving closer, so our knees touched under the blanket. I think about him a lot, lately, about how he handled things. A boot, what kind of man he was. He would be proud of you, I said, touching his hand gently. He looked down at our hands, then back up at me. Think I've always been looking for that feeling again, thesis D. He gave me the way he made things feel solid. His voice dropped lower, and I feel that around you still, even now. It swallowed my heartbeat faster, my throat eating in a way that was hard to explain. You were always my reason for staying strong. He reached up and gently touched my jaw, his fingers light but deliberate. You don't always have to be strong. You know, there was something about the way he said it, not like a son comforting a mother, but like a man seeing the woman behind the title, the woman who had carried so much on her army. Eyes fluttered shut. His hand remained my cheek, warm and steady. When I opened them again, he was still watching, searching, waiting for something unspoken. And then it happened. Slow, hesitant, full of questions neither of us voiced. He leaned in, and our foreheads met, first soft and careful, his breath mingled with mine. He was trembling slightly. So was I. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but we were right on the edge of it, teeting between the safety of what we'd always known and the possibility of something else. Something more. I pulled back gently, my hands still on his airquid. Need to be careful. He nodded, not moving away. I know. I'm not trying to hurt anything. I feel something done. I don't want to pretend. I don't. There ain't softened outside. The only other sound was the quiet hum of the candle burning beside us. I feel it too, I admitted, barely above a whisper, his fingers interlaced with mine, warm and firm. I don't want to lose this. He said. You won't, I replied. We sat like that for a long time, just breathing, holding hands, letting the moment settle around us. Nothing more passed between us physically. It didn't need to their ways already enough in the air, enough touch, changed the shape of everything whether we acted on it or not. Later that night, Is stood in the kitchen rinsing dishes through window above the sink, fobbed from through warmth. Inside, Eric came in quietly bend me and placed a towel on the counter, drying the plates as I hand it. And to him it felt like a dance weedin 1,000 times, and yet something about it felt entirely new. As I reached out for the last dish, he leaned in and kissed the back of my shoulder. Soft, respectful, not demanding anything, just being close. I paused, heart racing. I'm still your son, he whispered, but tonight I just want to be someone who's here with you. Tears welled in my eyes. I didn't turn around, I just nodded and left warmth of him at my back wrap around like a blanket. It wasn't a night of fanciers. It was a night of recognition, a night that showed us both we were walking a line we hadn't expected, a line drawn with care, not confusion, a lineage of us wanted to cross without understanding what it would mean, but we had acknowledged it, and that Alana changed everything. The days that followed passed with a gentleness I hadn't known in years, not hurried, not loud, just quiet understanding. We didn't speak of that night directly, not the moment on the couch, not the touch in the kitchen, not the way his voice shook when said he just wanted to be here, but it lingered between us, shaping everything. Garrick stayed longer than he'd planned. He hadn't found the right job yet. But I knew better. We were both caught in something delicate, something that didn't take a name but had taken root in our lives, like a vine curling through cracks, uninvited but impossible to ignore. It woke earlier than usual one morning and found him already in the garden. He was crouched by the rose bushes, trimming fed heads like he'd seen me do 100 times. The sun was just beginning to arise, casting a soft orange glow through the mist. It was one of those mornings that made you feel like Thorold was whispering. I stepped out barefoot onto the dewy grass, wrapping Miss Weeder tighter around me. You're a pearly, I said. He looked up, smiling softly. Couldn't sleep, figured I'd help out a bit. I knelt beside him, brushing my fingers over a newly opened bloom there early this year. He said, then paused. Maybe everything's just trying to bloom at the same time. We both chuckled quietly, though we both knew that wasn't what he meant. We stayed out there for an hour side by side, in quiet. We didn't need to talk sometimes. Presence speaks louder than anything else. That evening, I made a big dinner: lasagna, garlic bread, salad through arcs. I don't know why, maybe because it needed something solid to hold on to, something familiar. As we sat down to eat, Eric was unusually quiet. His fork moved slowly, his gaze heavy with something through hadn't yet been said. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down and looked at me. Really looked. I think I need to go, he said softly. I stopped me, my hand still on my glass. Go, I asked thou. I had known it was coming. He nodded. It's been good here, better than I expected, but I don't want to stay. Just Beckos, it's safe. I swallowed hard. Are you sure? No, he admitted, but I think you need to figure out who I am without lining on the past, without leaning on you. I looked down at my plate, my chest tashed, but I understood. Maybe I understood bitter. Then he did. Sometimes love means stepping back, sometimes it means not holding on, even when every part of you wants to. I'll miss you, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'll miss you too, replied, more than I can say. We didn't creed not, then we sat there and finished Etner like it was any other night but one. He stood to take his plate to Thienes. He paused behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders, pressing he shook to the top of my head. Thank you, he whispered, for seeing me, for letting me see you. That night we sat in the living room one last time. No wine, namavi, just the two of us in the fading light. He rested his head on my lap the way he used to when he was little, and I ran my fingers through his hair slowly, tenderly. I don't know what this was, he said after a while, but it mattered. It did, I said. It still does. The next morning I stood at the porch as he parked his car. He gave me one last hug, long, warm, full of everything we hadn't said. Then he was gone. The house was skied again, the way it had been before, but something inside Me had changed, I wasn't just alone. Now I was aware, awake, something had stirred that I didn't know still lived inside me that night. I sat in the porch with a blanket over my lapand, a cup of tea in my hand. I watched the stars blink into view one by one, unthought of the way he looked at me, not as a mother, not as a role, but as a woman. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. We had crossed a boundaries, but we had done it with care, with honesty, with restraint. We had held something delicate in our hands and passed it back to each other, gently without shattering it. He would go on and build his life, and I would stay here and continue mine. But something beautiful had bloomed between us in that brief window of time, something rooted not in desire but in understanding, and I would carry it with me quietly. Always that evening had changed everything. Thanks for listening.